This incident happened to me over the Christmas holidays this past year, and it just occurred to me that the sheer insanity of it may make it a good fit for here. For reference, I'm a 24-year-old female. So my cousin and I decided to go up a few hours north for a nice winter cabin weekend. It went great, nothing creepy happened, but on our final day we packed up at about 6 a.m. and hopped in the car to get an early start on the 5-hour drive that we had ahead of us. It was a foggy morning, not actively snowing, but previous snowfalls had piled up quite a bit, making the drive a little bit riskier in the dark, early hours of the morning. My cousin was driving, and we were chatting and listening to podcasts, not too aware of our surroundings. We were about maybe 20 minutes into the drive when, unfortunately, the car skidded off the road a little, damn the black ice, and we very slightly grazed a tree. We got out to take a look, and by some miracle, I don't even know how, there was no damage or anything on the car. As my cousin and I started to laugh with relief, we were just thanking our luck when I shielded my eyes because of some idiot with their crazy high beams coming up behind us. Ugh, so obnoxious, my cousin laughed, and starting to open her door to step back in, when the blinding headlights car honks and continues to keep at it as they approached us. My cousin and I just sort of looked at each other, super confused, but we quickly hopped back into the car. The car begins to slow down, and we're able to see a man in the driver's seat, and he finally takes his hand off the horn and pulls up right next to my cousin's car, which is really dumb because we were off-road and it was crazy slippery. But he rolls down his window and motions for my cousin to roll down ours. We figure it's fine because he's still inside of his car and we're in ours. I know, probably still a stupid move. But he says, "Hey there, ladies. In a rush this morning?" He laughs. Not really. Just trying to get home. Can we help you with something?" My cousin replies, totally stone-cold poker face. "Oh, no. I just noticed you dropped something about 2 kilometers back. It fell out of your trunk." My cousin turned to look at me. "Did you shut the trunk when we left?" Yeah, dude, obviously," I replied, and knowing the way the car is shaped, we should have been able to definitely hear an open trunk. "Oh, well, thank you, sir, but I think you might have had us mixed up with somebody else, maybe?" my cousin said, and immediately rolled up a window. It's hard to put my finger on it, but for some reason, this man just gave us really bad vibes. He starts blaring his horn again and motioning for us to roll down the window. My cousin rolls it down again and sees him holding up some women's underwear and smiling and says, "See, this look familiar?" I can literally remember the exact tone with which he said that, and we said, "No thanks, sir. You have a great day now." My cousin quickly rolled up her window again and floored it, quickly hopping back on the road, and thankfully the man was either taken aback or just gave up, and we didn't see him for the next hour or so. My cousin and I were both a little bit shaken, I'll admit, but we tried to just laugh it off since we were safe and hadn't seen his car following us or anything like that. But about 2 hours into our trip, we got off at an exit to fill up for gas and grab some breakfast at a Starbucks. My cousin and I mobile ordered, and I was going to quickly run in and grab our food and drinks. It had started snowing at this point, and while the sun had been up for a little bit, it was still foggy and gloomy, making it hard to see the surroundings. But I ran in, and as I reached for our food, someone's arm reached over mine to grab a napkin, and I instantly flinched. When I looked up, I truly almost crapped myself because it was that same man again. Despite him never getting out of his car, he did have his highlights on, and I was able to get a clear view of his face. And it was definitely him. I was sure of that. "Look at us, just like old friends." He smiled at me. I immediately looked down, grabbed my food, and started walking out of the store. As I left, I heard him talking to the barista saying, "See that beauty queen over there? That's my beauty queen." And I mean, what the heck, right? I almost had tears in my eyes because I was so terrified. I power walked back to the car, almost tripping outside because I was so scared, and I wasn't walking like a normal person. I hopped in and screamed, "We need to get the hell out of here, back on the road. He's inside the Starbucks." My cousin started laughing, thinking that I was pranking her, but she quickly realized that that was not the case when the man walked out of the Starbucks a few seconds later, with no drink or food in hand, walking straight towards our car, waving at us. My cousin quickly started to turn the car on when the man reached into his pocket. I genuinely thought that he was about to pull out a weapon as well, holding up the underwear that he had before. Thankfully, my cousin took no time in backing out of there and speeding back onto the highway. We were both freaking out at this point, not sure how he ended up at the same stop as us, despite us not seeing him behind us at all at any point. I mean, he could have taken some sort of back roads that we didn't know about, sure, but it would have taken him so much longer than us to get there. Unless he'd been trailing behind us. I don't know, but we quickly tried to find an alternate route on our Maps app, and thankfully there was one that made us go through some local roads which we hoped might help. Of course, with our luck though, as we were going through a smaller town, I felt the car getting gradually lower on my side, so we pulled over at a well-lit gas station and realized that we were losing air in one of the tires. We were both too scared to get out, but figured that if we went out together that it might be less scary and also less risky. So we did. We filled up the tire with some air and it seemed to be okay. We got back in the car, back on our way. Everything seemed fine too until maybe 10 minutes later when this car just seemed to appear out of nowhere and directly behind us. My cousin and I just looked at each other, having no idea what to do if it were the man. And our suspicions were confirmed when he blared his stupid horn yet again, then quickly swerved off the road to get right next to us. What the heck, right? But this time, he was on my side. He had his window rolled down and he was screaming at us. At this point though, I didn't care at all, and I called my brother-in-law, who was a cop. I know, I probably should have called the police directly. It was a stupid move on my part, but in the moment I was just trying to justify this as being not that serious. But my brother-in-law told us to drive directly to the nearest police station and to call them right away so that they would be alerted. And literally, as he was instructing me, the creep just braked his car, just stopped on the side of the snowy, icy road. We were still speeding away though, so it quickly got harder and harder to see him, but from what I could make out, he had gotten out of his car and was now just sitting on the hood. Just sitting there, watching us in this freezing, snowing weather. My cousin and I didn't want to stop or do anything with about an hour left in the journey, so we decided to just book it straight back home, and thankfully, that was the end of it. Now, I know we made a lot of stupid mistakes that could have potentially had horrible consequences, but I'm super happy that we made it out alive and unharmed. I still don't know how he caught up to us seemingly magically like that and why he just sat there at the end, but I honestly think that I don't even want to find out. So this event happened when I was around 8 or 10 years old in the garden of my house that I used to live in. I'm telling this story as I remember it without fabricating anything whatsoever as well. I like to play with the ball that I had or look through the chain link fence which separated our family's property from a river. Now, to explain the situation which occurred as well, I also need to explain the shed that we had in the garden. This shed was placed directly at the back of the garden, in the middle of said chain link fence. This meant that I could enter the shed from the front, go to the right side of the shed or the left, but not take the back as it was placed in front of the fence. Another important note as well is that the right wall of the shed had a window that would grant you vision of the inside of the entire shed. Now, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing was walking over to the right side of the shed, knocking the window 3 times, ducking down, then getting up and looking directly at the window. I remember doing this because it was fun for little old me, but of course nothing would ever show itself, and I only did this in a way to sort of roleplay. But this day was different. Now, although parts of my memory are obviously a bit hazy, I remember the main event with perfect detail. I was watching the river through the fence, and then I walked to the right side of the shed. I knocked on the window 3 times and ducked down. When I jumped back up and looked through the window, there was this pale, white humanoid thing sprouted up, looking at me. I remember it looked me in the eyes, then it opened its mouth and started moving it. It wasn't moving it in a way as if it was talking, but it was just moving its lower jaw really quickly. It's hard to describe, but it was just moving its mouth really quick, and I instantly felt maliciousness coming from this creature. After that, it just ducked back down just as quickly as it came. The situation must have been no longer than 5 seconds, and I remember just staring at the window, sort of dumbfounded, completely shocked at what I just saw. Even though remembering this situation now makes me really creeped out and scared, 8 or 10-year-old me was more curious and perplexed than scared at the time. So I did what any curious child would have done, and I entered the shed. After all, there was only one way in and out, which was the front door. Plus, the only window of the shed could not be opened anyway, so that thing must be inside somewhere. When I walked into the shed, I didn't see anything. The shed itself was pretty small, so there would have been nowhere to hide either. And I just remember being really confused more than anything, so I just closed the door and continued playing outside. Looking back at this situation as an adult, though, I would have absolutely run away, as this thing was only human-shaped, but definitely not from our world. Also, I tend to get scared easily as well these days. The situation only really ever happened to me once and never again, even though I played the window knocking ritual dozens of times after the event occurred. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was just an overactive imagination, and I'm definitely open to that idea. But the only problem was that the creature, it just felt so real, and I can't imagine young me conjuring such a creepy thing from my mind. I also thought that maybe it was my reflection being slightly distorted as it rose up at a similar time that I did. The only problem with that theory is that the creature ducked down while I was still standing up. If you guys have any theories or suggestions or ideas or anything, or even maybe just some questions, then please feel free to leave something in the comment section below, as I would love to hear them. So first off, I feel as though I should give you guys some background information about myself. I was raised by my mother, who is 50% Cherokee and 50% French. Us kids have never met our biological grandpa, though, and believes in paranormal things, but tries to pretend that it isn't there. And my father, who is Scottish, English, German, and Jewish by blood. He, on the other hand, is 100% atheist and is rather skeptical about things that he can't explain. He endeavors to be a logical and scientific person in all things. Well, due to major differences in personalities, beliefs, and values, they divorced when I was about 8. She soon married my stepfather, who was a devout Southern Baptist from Mississippi, and basically gave up her identity as a native and became a God-fearing woman. Despite issues with my mother, my dad continued to let us visit with her mum and stepdad because he felt that they were good people. They taught us many things about native culture, spirituality, legends, and the people, and my grandmother and I spent a lot of time together, so I was given an opportunity to learn Cherokee medicine. My grandma actually comes from a long line of medicine men and women and is one herself. But anyway, now so many years later, at the ripe age of 23, I'm practically one myself too. So, this isn't a ghost story by any means, but I do believe it qualifies as paranormal, as it's definitely outside the usual daily happenings, that's for sure. About 2 years ago, my father, brother, and I moved into a new home, a little more in the country than our previous homes had been. It was all something that we thoroughly enjoyed because we grew up immersed in nature and we had a love for the land. Shortly after moving there, about 3 months in I'd say, I decided it was time to expand my family by getting myself a puppy. This would be the first dog that would actually be in my care, I've always had a very strong connection to dogs, as my guiding spirit is a wolf. I learned this many years ago from some practices in my culture. But after a while of searching, I came across a beautiful 5-month-old male German Shepherd Pitbull mix, and I went to meet him and instantly fell in love. He was the greatest as well, very sweet and kind to cats even, and also protective of me. He became my best friend pretty quickly, and he was just everything that you could want in a dog. Now, anyone who has owned a puppy or a young dog will know that body training, it's quite a task. Even after being with us like 2 months, he was still waking me up every 2 to 4 hours to go outside. I'll admit that it was hard on me, but it had to be done. But on this occasion in particular, we got a late-night visitor that we were definitely not expecting. So, like I said, my dog woke me up at night. It was about 2:45 in the morning, I'd guess. I wasn't ready, but I dragged myself out of bed and clicked on the leash. Opening the back door, I was instantly greeted with a cool breeze. I rolled my eyes and went out into the yard with my pooch, and he did the usual dog thing, sniffed around and jumped into the freshly cut grass, completely forgetting what we'd come outside to do in the first place, but I whistled at him, recaptured his attention, and he got back to business quickly. As he squatted, I turned my head to the sky, offering him some privacy. The moon was exceptionally large that night, almost full but not quite. During this observation, I began to realize, though, that there was no typical nighttime noise around me. And as if that wasn't unusual enough, I had a shiver go down my spine, and my hair began to stand on end. That's when I heard my dog as well let out a growl as he pinned himself against my legs. When I looked down at him as well, his tail was tucked and his hackles were raised. When I tried to move, he pressed himself against me more as well. Another shiver came over me, and now I took the opportunity to follow where his eyes were looking. And when I did, I was looking at what appeared to be a coyote. Not totally uncommon in this area as well. I mean, we'd heard them on many nights while living there, but this was different, looked different, and felt different for sure. The most frightening thing, however, was that it was looking right back at me. I didn't move, I didn't take my eyes off of it, and that's how I was able to see its features so clearly in the moonlight. Its fur looked thin, even bald in some spots maybe. Its eyes were yellow, not reflective yellow like you'd see on a dog in the dark, but yellow like the sun, very contrasted against the black of the night. Then, looking more closely, I noticed that its back legs were longer than a normal coyote's. Longer than any canine creatures should be, actually. Starting at the hips and going down, they seemed to look almost bipedal in design. And I think that's when it dawned on me just what I was looking at. Well, I picked up my 60-pound dog, never taking my eyes off this creature, and as I did, I said a Cherokee prayer in my head that I'd learned from my grandma. And as if it was physically upset, it sort of backed up slightly, and then I heard a voice that perfectly mimicked my grandma say, "Why would you do that, Micahs?" Now, no one aside from my grandparents ever called me that. It was their special name for me, in fact. But with that, I didn't waste any time, and I darted for the door, dog still in my arms, entered, put him down, and I quickly locked it behind me. The noise must have woken my brother as well, because he came into the kitchen all bothered. He asked me what was going on and why the dog was all riled up. I held my finger to my mouth and shut off the light. We then made our way into the living room and shut that light off as well. And honestly, just like something out of a horror movie, the outline of a tall humanoid thing shone through the stained glass of the small window on the door, thanks to the bright moonlight. Well, we both froze, and we made a grab for the doorknob when it started to turn, capturing it just in time to lock it. That's when it spoke to him, but this time in my grandpa's voice. "Bubba, why don't you let Grandpa in?" They live on the reservation in Cherokee, NC. His face, though, turned ghost white, and he turned to me. That's when I mouthed the word, and he paled even more. It began to tap on the glass, and we both went into my room, and we just ignored the knocking. After some time, the knocking stopped and everything went quiet, and after checking around and looking out all the windows, there was nothing to be seen, so we ended up just going to bed, although I didn't sleep well that night. The next night, around the same time though, the tapping grew louder this time. We sat in the living room praying that it would go away, but the tapping turned into knocks, which turned into pounding the more that we prayed. This must have woken up my father too, because he came downstairs in a huff. We told him about the night prior during the day, but he didn't believe us, which was typical, and thought that it was just one of my brother's friends being a jerk. So when he saw the silhouette in the window, he grew more angry and made a beeline for the door. We yelled at him not to open it, but he did. But instead of harming him, it seemed to be afraid, because it got down on all four legs again and just sort of disappeared down the road. At that moment, my dad's face paled as he stumbled back a few steps. He locked the door behind him quickly, and eventually we all went to bed. The next day, we talked about the situation. I explained to him that the natives call this creature a skinwalker. They aren't very common in Cherokee legend. They're more of a Western native legend, but my grandparents still taught us about them. Dad, being the skeptic that he was, though, just summed it up as a weird thing that he couldn't explain. Later that day, I went to our local craft store and bought juniper ash, as my grandma instructed me to do, and I sprinkled it around our house. And after that, it never returned. My dog was just never the same after that night. It's as though the entire experience sort of changed him, because he went from this loving animal to sort of mean and unpredictable. He started lashing out at anyone who wasn't female. We tried correcting it over the course of a year and a half, but nothing really helped. He finally harmed my brother as well, causing him to bleed, and after that I was forced to find him a new home. Luckily, he's with a couple who are both female, and he seems much happier, but even to this day, I guarantee that he won't go out at night. I didn't mention the name of the creature after that very many times, because it's considered a bad omen in native culture to give those things energy. But if anyone is feeling nervous after reading this, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll happily try and walk you through what you should do. Some of this information I got from my mum, as I was too young to remember all of it. But from the moment that I started speaking, I would tell my parents about Dot. I was obsessed with him, and I would tell everyone about him. I would talk to him, I'd play with him. My parents assumed that it was just an imaginary friend. I mean, lots of kids have them, and considering I'm the youngest of 4 boys, they guessed that my brothers just didn't want to hang out with a little kid, so I made my own friend. It began to escalate though when my mum would find me, 2 or 3 years old, sitting alone in my room having conversations to thin air and responding as if someone had said something, nodding, listening, laughing as if he told a joke. I treated Dodd like he was a real person, and I really genuinely believed that he was. Part of me still does, in fact, I'll have to admit. I would demand that Dodd have his own seat and his own plate of food every single day, breakfast, lunch and dinner. Anytime that we left the house, I'd scream and cry if they forgot Dodd in the house. He had to have his own seat. He ended up having an entire toddler's car seat because I was so scared of him getting hurt. And he had to be picked up, set in his seat, and had to be buckled in just like they did to me. My parents had to talk to Dodd the way that they talked to me, or I would get upset that they were ignoring him as well. I still have memories of Dodd as well, genuinely seeing Dodd with my own eyes. I'd swear on my life that he was really there to this day. He was about a foot or so tall, the size of a small child, like I was, but he was pure white, mostly featureless as well, bipedal. He had no face. He had an outward bump where a muzzle should have been, and 2 indents where he should have had eyes. He didn't wear clothes and didn't have real paws or hands. He almost looked like Maybe a gummy bear with round tapered hands, and feet as well, with no details whatsoever. But I remember that he was solid white and not transparent. He didn't speak verbally. It was more like I just knew what he was saying. I also don't really remember him walking anywhere or moving at all, really, but I'd look away and look back, and he'd always be in a different place. I'd swear on my life as well, on everything that I know, in fact, that he in some sense was real. Now, I don't know how old I was exactly. I would have to guess around 4 or 5. But I went outside with Dodd one day because he wanted to show me something. He led me around the back of the house to a square panel of sorts that I'd never seen before. It was like a tiny door held with a simple hook latch. I opened it, and inside was a concrete floor, a really low ceiling, and a dusty old red tricycle. The classic little one that you're probably imagining, and it was full of cobwebs, and I couldn't see anything other than a tiny bit of concrete and the tricycle because the sun was adjacent from where I was. But I climbed in the little cubbyhole and just sort of sat there with my knees to my chest, and I can still vividly remember seeing Dodd standing just outside the door, facing me. I didn't even know this spot existed. I had no reason to. I mean, who tells their toddler about a spooky concrete hole in the back of the house that's only accessed from the outside? Recently, I told my parents about that memory a few months ago, and they said that they purposely didn't tell me or my brothers about it, because if you go inside that area, about 2 feet in, the concrete just drops off down into open pipes, wires, and insulation, and since there's no access from the inside, it'd be really hard to find us if one of us fell in. I also didn't forget about Dodd for a single day for like 6 years. I never let one of his meals go by. I never ignored him for a whole day. I never let us go on a car ride without him for 6 years, but eventually we had to move houses. I'd lived in the same house this whole time, and it was the final day that we'd ever be at that house, and we were getting in the car to go to the new house. My mum picked me up and put me in the car, and then turned to pick up Dodd and bring him too. When she did, I immediately started crying and angrily said, "Dodd's not coming." And after that, I apparently stopped talking about Dodd altogether that day. And for years, I would get extremely upset and angry if someone mentioned him around me. My mum told me that she researched the house that we had lived in, and there was in fact a little boy years before us that had died when a gas pipe, maybe I think, bursted directly in his face. And as scary and weirdly fitting for my faceless friend as that sounds, I don't know if I buy into it personally. I was never afraid of Dodd, and I don't think of him as scary now. I think it's extremely strange, obviously, especially considering that he appeared as a featureless bear and he stuck with me for 6 years, much longer than most imaginary friends. But I do think it's mind-boggling, though, that he brought me to a place in the house that I'd never been in, and that the knowledge of it was deliberately kept from me. And I mean, sure, it could absolutely be some sort of absurd psychological thing, or it could be some strange kind of ghost or spirit, but either way, I believe in and still think kindly of Dodd. And no matter what he actually is, I'm just grateful to have had a strange childhood friend like Dodd. So I'm a 20-year-old female, and this probably happened when I was about 15. So growing up, I visited my father and stepmother every summer for about a month. One evening when I was visiting, my stepmom and I went for a walk around their neighborhood. The walk started out completely normal until, well, it just wasn't. Because as we walked past these 2 houses, whose backyards were viewable, we spotted something so strange happening between them that we stopped dead in our tracks. For like 20 seconds, we just sort of stood in silence trying to decipher what our eyes were seeing. Keep in mind the sun was setting, so it was kind of dark. But first, we see a dog in one of the yards. It was standing right at the fence line and peering into the neighboring yard. The fences were those metal ones that you can see through. But then we see the thing that the dog was looking at. In the other yard, crouched low to the ground, was At first glance, this undefinable mass. Was it another dog? No. A child playing outside? No. It was a completely naked man on all fours, crouched on the ground and crawling. He slowly crawled towards this dog in the most disturbing and disgusting way that I've ever seen a human move. Behind him were his clothes perfectly folded in a pile waiting to be put back on. My stepmom and I just couldn't form words as we watched this man approach this really confused dog. When we reached the fence line where the dog stood, he then proceeded to shove his face into the fence to what appeared to be him greeting the dog. After my stepmom and I fully realized what we were seeing, we just sort of turned around and we sped walk to tell my father, who is a cop. He didn't believe us one bit. I'll admit that my stepmom and I tend to make anything that we experience together 20 times more dramatic, but he eventually bought our very real account and called it in. And we later found out that this creep is known for breaking into people's yards, stripping naked, and playing with their pets. My stepmom still feels bad about young me seeing that, but I don't know. I think it's a bit funny, sort of weird and a bit creepy as well. It's definitely a strange way to see your first nude man, that's for sure. But anyway, after that we never saw the nude man again because, well, I guess he was probably locked up.